Coming up on the Civil Discourse, a panel discussion unites 4 experts to address the purpose and future of the humanities in education and in the greater culture. Join us for Sunset on the Humanities, a special conversation in partnership with the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia.
All human problems are complicated. So the humanities, I think, are about helping people to deal with complicated problems, to deal with contradiction, with complexity, with nuance, and not to be satisfied with sound bites, slogans, simplistic formulas as we confront difficult problems.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Civil Discourse. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, English professor and Dean of the Pennoni Honors College at Drexel University. We're holding this event at the Rosenbach, a museum and library in Philadelphia with an exceptional collection of rare books, manuscripts, furniture, and decorative arts collected in the early 20th century by Dr. Abraham Rosenbach and his older brother, Phillip. The site is a welcoming place to anyone interested in history, literature, and the arts, and as such, an apt place for us to hold this panel that will explore the current state of the humanities in higher education. I want to thank the Rosenbach for hosting this event and Doctors Mark and Vivian Greenberg, whose generosity made this panel possible. We've assembled an illustrious panel to discuss this issue, and let me introduce them briefly. Andrew Delbanco is a prolific scholar and author. He is also the Alexander Hamilton Professor of American Studies at Columbia University and president of the Teagle Foundation. Dana A. Williams is Dean of the Graduate School and Professor of African American Literature at Howard University. She is also current president of the Modern Language Association. Phillip Magness is an author and economic historian and the David J. Theroux Chair at the Independent Institute. And finally, Laurie Zierer is Executive Director of Pennsylvania Humanities and a member of the Board of Directors of Leadership Philadelphia. Welcome all. So let's begin by defining the humanities. I've seen a number of different ways of understanding this group of discipline. Would one or two of you like to take a stab at a definition? Dana, as president of the Modern Language Association, which is the premier organization for English studies and foreign languages, really is an apt person to define this.
I'm happy to. It's challenging, but a good challenge that I think that we can accept. I think the very fact that the humanities does not have a definitive definition is a part of what makes the humanities so special. For sure, it is consideration of languages and literatures. There are other disciplines, obviously, that are also a part of the conversation. But any discipline that really thinks about humans and their relation to the world and context and society, I think, can be considered a part of the humanities when we think about content. So methodologically, it is how do we do the work that we do? How do we interpret? How do we ask questions? How do we create context and translation? How do we begin to think about humans in relation to themselves, to each other, creation, time, machines, animals, you name it. So really, if we think about it from the kind of literal perspective, I'd say it's related to humans and the way that we consider ourselves and think about creative expression.
That's a very good and comprehensive definition. But, Laurie, would you like to add to it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so honored to be on this panel, to learn from you, as well as to bring some perspectives to bear from the public humanities of what the humanities looks like across Pennsylvania. And we really see the humanities as more of a verb than a noun. not as a subject, but as a practice of taking those books off the shelves, putting them in people's hands to take action, civic action in their communities for a thriving democracy, but also for themselves individually and for the community for well-being and healing. It's a different take where we put people at the center rather than content. And we have found that to be a way to redefine and reframe and make it relevant across Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I want to, oh, we have a third.
I knew
Yes.
Trump one.
So the thought I had on the way down here was, I agree, everything that Dana and Laurie said, absolutely right. But I want to come at this a little differently and talk about what a humanistic imagination or sensibility might look like, and what we're worried about losing in that respect. And this famous comment was rattling around in my mind, made by Scott Fitzgerald in an essay called The Crack Up, in which he wrote about what we used to call his nervous breakdown. And there's a famous sentence which I hope to get more or less right. He says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind and still retain the ability to function." And my thought is that we could change that opening phrase, first-rate intelligence, and we can put in there humanistic habit of mind, or humane habit of mind, is the ability, to paraphrase or translate, to deal with contradiction, with complexity, with nuance, and not to be satisfied with sound bites, slogans, simplistic formulas as we confront difficult problems.
And not to panic, wouldn't you
And
say?
not to panic.
Yeah.
Not to panic, that's right.
When that happens, yeah.
And not to panic, because all human problems are complicated.
The fact that English and history majors, which used to be in the top 10, if not the top 2, 3 majors at elite universities and liberal arts schools, at least when I was in college, have sunk far below. You don't see them in the top 10 anymore. At the same time, more specialized areas of study like feminist studies, queer studies, African American studies, disability studies have gained popularity. Is this, in your opinion, a healthy trend, or has this splintered the humanities and weakened it? And I'll ask Phillip to answer this.
Absolutely. Well, I can speak somewhat to the statistics behind this, because there have been studies that look roughly for the last decade, going back to the early 2010s, and you see all of what we conventionally consider the largest humanities, philosophy, history, English, foreign language, and several closely related fields are in absolute decline in the number of students that are majoring in them. And that's at the undergraduate level. Then there's another problem that's overlaid on top of that. PhD production in the humanities has been very, very large. Some of the largest output of any department across the university. There are more English PhDs than there are economists, finance, biology, chemistry, anything else. And it shows on the job market, because now you have a glut of basically more than a decade of people that have had trouble finding jobs in academia, which was conventionally where these PhDs went to. So now when like a new job posts in one of the major humanities disciplines, it's not uncommon to have 100, 200, even 300 applicants for that.
Is there a connection between these other splintered groups or areas and that decline? I wonder if any of the others on the panel can answer that.
I think so, but I want to, Terry, just a little bit and talk a little bit about the outlier perspective, particularly from HBCUs. The studies suggest that the declines are happening at major universities, elite universities, but holding steady at HBCUs.
Really?
For the humanities. Now, it's a real interesting thing, because everybody thinks these first-gen students, these underrepresented students, like they all want jobs that make a lot of money. No, apparently not. They want happiness. They want to contribute to the world in a particular kind of way.
Do you
They're
think in
mission-oriented.
the HBCUs there's more of a freedom to feel that way?
I do, absolutely. And I know that I'm in a very unique position with Howard in a particular kind of research status. very different from the state school. But humanities indicators suggest that those numbers are pretty consistent at other HBCUs in terms of the steady state of students who are willing to major in the humanities.
Can be a
oh, you're
little
right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Historically black colleges
Yeah.
and universities. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you said these fields are shrinking, and then you enumerated a number of fields that are growing.
Yeah.
And among them you mentioned, I think, women's studies or feminism. I don't remember if you mentioned African American studies,
Yes.
disability studies, queer studies.
Yeah.
And was this a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
So to connect to what I said at the outset, how about both? That is, it's a good thing because those fields are calling attention to and giving dignity to people who were invisible for a very long time and who felt that they were totally excluded from the curriculum, from the community, from the culture of the institution. So it's overdue that those fields are thriving. At the same time, there is a downside to it, it seems to me, because the proliferation of these fields tend to encourage students to gather into affinity groups that they think in some way are natural to themselves. It's a natural thing for people to gather together with people with whom they feel comfortable and who seem to them like themselves. And I do worry that what we lose when the popular history courses are declining in popularity, or the old-fashioned survey courses of literature are not thriving. We don't want to go further into a culture of division and separation and self-segregation than we already are.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to refer to there was a famous quarrel in the 1920s between the scientist C.P. Snow and the literary critic F.R. Leavis. And Snow felt that people ought to be educated in science as they were in the humanities. And I don't think this argument would go forward today because I think the sciences have now taken on a dominant role in undergraduate education. And I wonder if some on the panel could address what you feel is the fundamental difference between science and the humanities as a part of undergraduate education, and which one is more important for the undergraduate, in your view?
In higher ed, the physical sciences are usually associated with a tangible research output. It's the discovery of a new medicine, discovery of a new property of physics, things that are very easy to quantify, especially if you're going to seek grant money for. You can say, well, I accomplished this invention, or I made this medical advance in the last year, you should continue funding me. Whereas, how do you do that for teaching Shakespeare? You're inculcating what could be a lifelong love of literature, a lifelong exploration process through subjects that are often very difficult to quantify. And that makes it somewhat harder for humanities scholars to really sell the message of what they do.
Yeah, I think you got at something fundamental. It's hard to sell the humanities now in a very quantifiable culture.
I think, though, that there is an argument to be made that the discovery comes through that humanistic inquiry practice in terms of like, what makes this work? And that's a humanistic question. It's not so much a science question. The science question,
scientists ask that question, do you think?
A scientist who also has some humanist impulses, I think. But if it's just if you're talking about a scientist who is reading the book without the teacher, saying, watch for patterns. And so you see this thing that's like being created and you said, this keeps happening. The way that we think about science in a general kind of sense, I think, is it keeps happening, now what? So this is a pattern. Whereas the humanist is going to say, why is this happening? Which is why the scientist needs at least 4 courses in the humanities, as an undergraduate, right?
Complementary approaches.
Yes.
In the public humanities, I always love the quotation from Zora Neale Hurston, that research is formalized curiosity.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
It's that poking and prodding and asking those big questions of what the meaning is in the world and how you use the humanities, at least we use the humanities that way, to put them in people's hands to ask those big questions, because people are tired of seeing themselves as problems to be solved. They want to be in front of the problem and be able to solve it themselves.
there's I think an oddity to this situation. It's not hard to explain why students are drawn to STEM, as we call it these days, right? That's where a lot of the intellectual action is in our society, and that's where the opportunities seem to be. So I don't ever try to discourage a student from pursuing that path. It's the path of our time, of our moment. And yet, at the same time, my impression is that the questions you raise, what's the difference between science questions and humanities questions? The questions that students are passionate about and that they are often in conflict about, both with others and within themselves, are humanities questions. Like right now, for example, where do you draw the line between free speech and hate speech? Or the environment, what sacrifices should people be required to make in order to save the planet? So they care deeply about these questions, and the problem I think we have is that our universities in general are not doing a very good job of giving them a vocabulary for talking and thinking about these questions and learning how to disagree about them in a civil and mutually respectful way.
That I think is absolutely essential. But I wanted to talk about some of the reasons why humanities, I mean, you actually touched on some, the humanities has declined in recent decades, actually. And one might be said to have to do with deconstruction and the rise of postmodern theory within the university, which flattens everything to a text that reflects the power relationships of the culture. I wonder if any of you have strong views on this idea, that there is some relationship between the rise of postmodern theory, which has always an ideological, or has become a very ideologically charged way of thinking, and the fact that the humanities is in decline.
Academic humanities, particularly in literature, made a bet that young people were fundamentally iconoclastic, were fundamentally suspicious of received platitudes, monuments of culture, works of art, and there was an exciting period of a quarter century or so when all kinds of new intellectual approaches were developed to show what was the matter with these authors we revered, texts we considered classic, to the extent that, and this is a distortion, but if the question used to be, what can I learn from this text? The question became, what's wrong with this text? Who's being oppressed here? Who's being victimized? What wool is being pulled over our eyes? What lie is being told to us through this text? And that had some power for a while. It's run out of gas. Young people are not fundamentally iconoclastic. They're fundamentally looking for something that they can get excited about in a positive way, something that can help build a better world, something they can hold up and emulate. So I think literary studies did lose its way, and I think it's starting to find its way back.
Okay, well, let me follow up with that and say this notion of greatness, which, you know, when I was in college, the idea of a canon made up of great work was something that was a given. And there was a sense of reverence for certain works and certain authors. And then with postmodern theory, the idea, as Andrew mentioned, that picking apart some of these things became part of the academic culture, I think destroyed the idea of greatness, the idea of wonder before a work of literature, which I agree with you, students are hungry for. They want to feel reverence. But when their professors are constantly teaching them that this is very flawed, very much a product of an oppressive ideology, it's hard for them to feel that way. The problem in the past was that those who put together that canon were a group of privileged white men, right? They were the makers of the canon. They were the writers of the canon. They had, the pen was in their hands, as Jane Austen said. So who, if we are to go back to some sense of greatness, some sense of reverence and wonder, who will be the sages that can make a group of works that students at universities can read without first thinking about them in terms of their limitations. And Dana?
I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle.
You really don't? Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think that you can, for a number of reasons. The world is too big and interconnected, so we know so much more than we did pre-postmodernism, just in terms of and we have access to so many texts in so many languages that come from traditional presses, non-traditional presses. Higher education is under assault, and I don't think it's under assault in the university, in the classroom in the same way. So I understand what you're saying, like the faculty member standing in front of the students lecturing saying, here are all of the things that are wrong with this text, and the student was like, well, I like this book before you said that. I think the problem is a political system that says learning to think critically is problematic. And we want to stop it. So I think the university has to say, no, you can't stop it, and this is what we're going to promote. What is happening with anti-DEI, what's happening with assaults on college presidents, all of that is a kind of anti-intellectual sentiment that we have to fight back against very actively. There's an anti-university climate that is coming purely out of politics.
But when you say, there are a lot of anti-intellectual elements within the university.
Some of which I think are doing the work of politics.
Yeah, but politics on both sides.
I would agree with that still.
Yeah, I think that gets us back to the binary thinking that somebody mentioned, in which both students and faculty, for one reason or another, have been conditioned to think in terms of the good guys and the bad guys, the good texts and the bad texts. And that is the very opposite of what we think of as a nuanced and critically complex way of thinking. So I don't know if the university is modeling what you're describing. Yeah, Philip?
I think there's an issue here that is related to the decline of student majors. If you're only teaching a postmodernist perspective or only a critical theory perspective, those are the types of students that will come to your classes, that'll choose to major in that. That's a very small pool of America that's going through the university system. I think there's absolutely a room for postmodern ideas and deconstruction in these disciplines, but it should be one of many perspectives. And I think unfortunately what some of the data shows is the humanities have really unintentionally harmed themselves by moving too far in that direction over the past 15 to 20 years. Now this is an issue with all sorts of areas of academia. We tend to chase after fads. We tend to chase after the hottest new thing, and for a time, kind of this postmodern approach was exactly that. But if you look at the student body, the student population that's coming in, survey them on where they fall in the political landscape, where their interests fall. It's as diverse as America. You have a portion on the right, a portion on the center, a portion on the left. If you use the political spectrum, you have a variety of interests. But when you get into the faculty, the professoriate, so actually the interesting survey data shows that from about the 1960s to 2000 or so the Carnegie Commission and all of these other institutes that track this sort of thing, they put out a survey and they ask university faculty every couple of years, are you on the left, are you in the center, or are you on the right? And they ask some other questions to find out what are the trends. From about the mid-1960s to 2000, it was relatively stable. Universities were kind of on the center left of the American public, but there's a very sizable moderate segment, and then there's a fairly sizable conservative segment among the professors. Since 2000 to today, it's gone in a very sharp leftward trend. These are just the empirics of it. What that tells me is any student that comes into the classroom that's of a different perspective, they're only seeing that one perspective represented, they're not going to major in that course. They're not going to choose that subject matter. So it's almost like self-defeating in the way that we need to broaden the number of perspectives that are represented in the departments, then you'll get the students back in.
Laurie, do you feel that the public humanities is a place where some of this is going to be resolved?
At PA Humanities, we have in the last years been really thinking very seriously about this issue. And we have found that in the public, most people do not use the word humanities. People in the public find it alienating. They find it elitist. They associate it with academic humanities and these debates themselves, which are abstract and they have difficulty getting through them. But why do they love the humanities? Because exactly what these young students are doing. They're getting very focused on areas where they can make a difference, where they want to study very specifically an area of interest, if it's disability studies or gender studies, to make that difference. And they're passionate about it. Instead, rather than these debates, and I just lift this up, do we reframe this with the people who practice it and what they love about it most? Because they're telling us it's because it makes me flourish. It's because it makes meaning in my life. It's because I can make change.
I think we've touched on the edges of many of the issues that are roiling us now, but not in the depth that we could. I do want to thank you all from the point of view of the civil discourse for joining us today, and I want to thank our panel.